Elsa stared at the plate like it held a secret. The slice glowed faintly under the mess hall lights, pale, smooth, unreal. The American called it cheesecake. She almost laughed. Cheese was for soldiers in soup pots, not for dessert. Yet the scent was sweet. Too sweet. It smelled like a mistake she wanted to understand. The mess hall buzzed with a kind of warmth that didn't belong to war. Trays clattered, metal on metal. Laughter rose and broke like waves against the walls. Elsa sat near the end of the table, flanked by Marta and Lotta, the red-stitched PW on their uniforms catching the yellow light. Prisoner of war. 3 letters that explained everything and nothing. A plate slid toward her across the table. A slice of something pale rested on it, soft and gleaming like polished ivory. The American woman behind the counter had called it cheesecake. Elsa blinked.
Cheese and cake?
The words refused to fit together. Lotta leaned forward, curiosity bright in her 19-year-old eyes. Did she say cheese? She whispered in German. Like the kind you spread on bread? Yes, Marta muttered, her voice low, shaped by exhaustion and disbelief. Only the Americans would make dessert from something meant for soldiers' rations. Elsa picked up her fork, the tin edge cold against her fingers. The first cut slid through the soft surface without resistance, no crumble, no grain, just silk. The scent was faint, sweet, and unfamiliar. Nothing like the sharp tang of cork her mother used to make before the shortages. She brought the bite to her lips, hesitated, then tasted it. It was wrong. Wrong in the way that made your chest tighten, sweetness where salt should be, creaminess where sharpness should sting. Her tongue didn't know what to do with it. And yet it was beautiful. So rich it made her jaw ache. She blinked, startled, and almost laughed. Across the room, American guards talked and joked, their trays piled high with turkey, potatoes, bread rolls. One of them complained the gravy was watery. Watery, Elsa thought. They complained about abundance. Then the sergeant approached, an American woman, skin the color of coffee, arms folded, confidence stitched into every movement. Her nameplate read Sergeant Gloria Medina. She watched them with calm curiosity, like someone conducting an experiment. You gonna eat that, she said, tilting her head toward the untouched slices. Or just keep staring till it melts. Marta looked up wary. This is cheese? She asked, her English thick but careful. Cream cheese, Medina said, with sugar, eggs, vanilla, and graham crackers. She ticked them off on her fingers like ingredients in a spell. It's called dessert, ladies. Welcome to America. Lotta frowned, whispering to Elsa in German. She's joking. No one wastes cheese for dessert. Elsa didn't answer. She took another small bite. The flavor spread across her mouth, soft and enormous. A warmth she didn't understand settled in her chest. They must have so much, she said quietly, that they don't even know what else to do with it. Marta's fork paused mid-air. For a moment, none of them spoke. Around them, the mess hall echoed with casual laughter. The clatter of cutlery, the sound of boots without hurry. Every tray they saw held too much, real butter, jam, white bread. The kind of food you could only dream of in Germany's last years of the war. Sergeant Medina watched their faces soften from confusion to something closer to awe. You ladies want seconds? She asked. Lotta's head snapped up. More? Medina nodded toward the counter. Plenty left. Elsa couldn't speak. She just nodded once slowly, as though agreeing to something far larger than dessert. The sergeant returned with 3 new slices, thicker than the first. She set them down carefully, like offerings. Eat up, Thanksgiving's coming, she said. We make too much on purpose, too much on purpose. The words caught somewhere in Elsa's throat. In Germany, too much was a sin. Here it was tradition. Lotta took her second slice without hesitation. Marta hesitated longer, then surrendered. The room seemed to fade around them. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of forks tapping plates, the slow rhythm of tasting something impossible. Marta broke first. She pushed her plate an inch away, then laughed. A short, sharp, trembling laugh that made nearby guards glance over. Sweet cheese, she said in German. God help us. We thought we were the civilized ones. Elsa wanted to stop her, to hush her, but she couldn't. The words echoed inside her own chest. We thought we were the civilized ones. She remembered her days as a radio operator, the endless coded messages about strength, purity, superiority. She had believed them. She had believed everything until she saw American butter softening in a dish no one was guarding. Sergeant Medina sat again. folding her arms over the back of a chair. You folks ever had Thanksgiving? She asked casually. Elsa shook her head. It's about being grateful, the sergeant said. We make food, share it, remember what we still got. Elsa's gaze dropped to her plate. What did she still have? A uniform stripped of insignia. A country in ruins. A name that still tasted German when she said it out loud. She looked back up at Medina. You give food to prisoners? She asked. Not charity, Medina said. Habit. We feed people because that's what we do. You get used to it. The sentence sat there, simple and enormous. Elsa felt her throat tighten again. She wanted to tell the woman that in her country, feeding an enemy could cost you your life. That kindness itself had been rationed. But she didn't have the night pressed close to the barracks, a cold the potbelly stove couldn't reason with. The building breathed like an animal, boards creaking, nails ticking as they cooled, a chorus of sleep sounds from 100 bunks trying to forget the same year. Elsa lay on her back, hands folded, the taste of sweet cheese refusing to leave her mouth. It had settled where old certainties used to live, Lotta whispered across the dark. Do you think they eat like this every day? Not like this, Marta murmured. But enough to complain about gravy. The last word curled bitter on her tongue. Elsa watched the window where guard lights painted a lattice across the floorboards. I keep thinking about the butter. No one watching it. No one hiding it. Hiding is a habit, Marta said. Like breathing, silence stretched. A woman down the row coughed. The kind of cough war leaves like a signature. Someone turned in her blanket, strings rasping the wood slats. Lotta sniffed and tried to make it sound like nothing. What are we supposed to do with it? She asked finally. The feeling. Catalog it, Elsa said, because that was all she knew. Like a signal. Note the date, the time, the conditions. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Then wait for the next transmission. From who? Lotta said. From the world, Elsa answered. It sounded foolish when she heard it, but she didn't take it back. Bootsteps crossed the porch, measured, unhurried. The hinge breathed. The door swung inward a crack and let in a blade of yard light, pale and cold. A figure slipped through, short, sturdy, moving like a person used to not waking sleepers. Sergeant Medina. She paused at the center table, set something down and turned the door closed behind her with 2 fingers, gentling the latch until it kissed wood. Nobody spoke. The silence felt ceremonial. After a count of 20, Marta slid from her bunk. She was a roomer in wool socks crossing splintery floor. Elsa heard the whisper of paper, the fast, involuntary inhale when someone recognizes the shape of a thing before they choose it. Marta returned with a folded sheet and a pencil gnawed to a stub. She climbed back under the blanket and angled the paper toward the weak light that bled through the window. It's a recipe, she breathed. She wrote it out in whatever she thinks our language is. Elsa and Lotta crowded close until the wool blanket made a tent of warmth and breath. In blocky letters, clumsy and certain, the sergeant had printed cream cheese, room temp, eggs, 3, sugar, 3/4 cup, vanilla, a little, graham crackers, crush fine, bake slow. Besides several words, she'd sounded out German approximations. Raumtemperatur. Nicht kalt. The slanted notes felt like someone laying a bridge by hand. Room temperature, Lotta whispered, tasting the phrase. Like it might be a station you could travel to if you were patient. I haven't had anything at room temperature that mattered in years. Either cold that hurts or hot that burns. Marta traced a fingertip under bake slow. Slow, she repeated, as if the word itself could soften the years behind it. Her voice went somewhere else. When we boiled linens, we called it done when the steam stung your eyes. There was no slow. Elsa felt an ache for every small, ordinary instruction that had been stolen by hunger. Cream should be soft, dough should rest, knives should be sharp, but hands gentler still. She thought of the party posters that had barked orders in nouns and lightning bolts. This paper told her to let cheese breathe. What if she's tricking us? Lotta asked suddenly. A spark of the old training, reflexive and sharp. To what end? Marta said. To make us eat dessert properly? She tried to smother the smile, failed, and let it live. Elsa slid the recipe against her stomach, heat seeping through the thin cotton of her shirt. We copy it, she said. Twice, then we hide it. Her throat tightened. We protect it. Like a codebook, Marta said, understanding too quickly. Old habits. They copied by breath and memory. trading the pencil when the line thinned to nothing and sharpening it with a bread knife against a spoon until the point returned. Each letter felt like a small rescue. Nicht kalt, bake slow. Lotta's handwriting tilted like someone leaning into wind. When they finished, Lotta folded one copy into a square that would nest in her shoe. Marta stitched another into the hem of her pillowcase with 3 careful passes, thread pulled from the cuff of her sleeve. The sergeant's original stayed with Elsa. She slipped it into the inner pocket where she had once kept cipher keys, the paper crackling like a tame flame against her ribs. Sleep didn't come. Thoughts did. They arrived in order and in chaos, taking turns like children at a toy box. Her brother's grin by the river before the war made him older than their father. Her mother's hands pale with flour in years when flour was a fairy tale, the wireless tapping out lies she had believed because believing felt like duty. Beneath all of it, stubborn and soft, the memory of sweetness. Near dawn, the building changed color. The boards went from charcoal to blue to bleached cotton as the sky considered morning. A whistle blew somewhere, too jaunty for a prison, too ordinary for a battlefield. Lotta slept finally, mouth open, lashes dark against her cheeks, one hand curled like a child's. Marta had turned onto her side, face toward the wall, lips moving with silent arithmetic. Elsa stared at the night pressed close to the barracks, a cold the potbelly stove couldn't reason with. The building breathed like an animal, boards creaking, nails ticking as they cooled, a chorus of sleep sounds from 100 bunks trying to forget the same year. Elsa lay on her back, hands folded, the taste of sweet cheese refusing to leave her mouth. It had settled where old certainties used to live. Lotta whispered across the dark. "Do you think they eat like this every day?" "Not like this," Marta murmured, "but enough to complain about gravy." The last word curled bitter on her tongue. Elsa watched the window where guard lights painted a lattice across the floorboards. "I keep thinking about the butter. No one watching it. No one hiding it. Hiding is a habit," Marta said. "Like breathing." Silence stretched. A woman down the row coughed. The kind of cough war leaves like a signature. Someone turned in her blanket, strings rasping the wood slats. Lotta sniffed and tried to make it sound like nothing. "What are we supposed to do with it?" she asked finally. "The feeling." "Catalog it," Elsa said, because that was all she knew. Like a signal. Note the date, the time, the conditions. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Then wait for the next transmission." "From who?" Lotta said. "From the world," Elsa answered. It sounded foolish when she heard it, but she didn't take it back. Bootsteps crossed the porch, measured, unhurried. The hinge breathed. The door swung inward a crack and let in a blade of yard light, pale and cold. A figure slipped through, short, sturdy, moving like a person used to not waking sleepers. Sergeant Medina. She paused at the center table, set something down and turned the door closed behind her with 2 fingers, gentling the latch until it kissed wood. Nobody spoke. The silence felt ceremonial. After a count of 20, Marta slid from her bunk. She was a roomer in wool socks crossing splintery floor. Elsa heard the whisper of paper, the fast, involuntary inhale when someone recognizes the shape of a thing before they choose it. Marta returned with a folded sheet and a pencil gnawed to a stub. She climbed back under the blanket and angled the paper toward the weak light that bled through the window. "It's a recipe," she breathed. "She wrote it out in whatever she thinks our language is." Elsa and Lotta crowded close until the wool blanket made a tent of warmth and breath. In blocky letters, clumsy and certain, the sergeant had printed cream cheese, room temp, eggs, 3, sugar, 3 4-cup, vanilla, a little, graham crackers, crush fine, bake slow. Besides several words, she'd sounded out German approximations. Raumtemperatur. Nicht kalt. The slanted notes felt like someone laying a bridge by hand. Room temperature, Lotta whispered, tasting the phrase. Like it might be a station you could travel to if you were patient. "I haven't had anything at room temperature that mattered in years. Either cold that hurts or hot that burns." Marta traced a fingertip under bake slow. "Slow," she repeated, as if the word itself could soften the years behind it. Her voice went somewhere else. "When we boiled linens, we called it done when the steam stung your eyes." There was no slow. Elsa felt an ache for every small, ordinary instruction that had been stolen by hunger. Cream should be soft, dough should rest, knives should be sharp, but hands gentler still. She thought of the party posters that had barked orders in nouns and lightning bolts. This paper told her to let Cheese breathe. What if she's tricking us? Lotta asked suddenly, a spark of the old training, reflexive and sharp. To what end? Marta said. To make us eat dessert properly? She tried to smother the smile, failed, and let it live. Elsa slid the recipe against her stomach, heat seeping through the thin cotton of her shirt. We copy it, she said. Twice, then we hide it. Her throat tightened. We protect it. Like a codebook, Marta said, understanding too quickly. Old habits. They copied by breath and memory, trading the pencil when the line thinned to nothing and sharpening it with a bread knife against a spoon until the point returned. Each letter felt like a small rescue. Nicht kalt, bake slow. Lotta's handwriting tilted like someone leaning into wind. When they finished, Lotta folded one copy into a square that would nest in her shoe. Marta stitched another into the hem of her pillowcase with 3 careful passes, thread pulled from the cuff of her sleeve. The sergeant's original stayed with Elsa. She slipped it into the inner pocket where she had once kept cipher keys, the paper crackling like a tame flame against her ribs. Sleep didn't come. Thoughts did. They arrived in order and in chaos, taking turns like children at a toy box. Her brother's grin by the river before the war made him older than their father. Her mother's hands pale with flour in years when flour was a fairy tale, the wireless tapping out lies she had believed because believing felt like duty. Beneath all of it, stubborn and soft, the memory of sweetness. Near dawn, the building changed color. The boards went from charcoal to blue to bleached cotton as the sky considered morning. A whistle blew somewhere, too jaunty for a prison, too ordinary for a battlefield. Lotta slept finally, mouth open, lashes dark against her cheeks, one hand curled like a child's. The workshop smelled of oil, starch, and the faint iron tang of old thread. It wasn't a place for conversation. It was a place for motion. Needles went in and out, scissors whispered, boots scraped on concrete as guards shifted their weight, bored and watchful. Every sound had its rhythm, and every rhythm felt like survival. Elsa sat at the end of a long wooden table beside Marta, her eyes following the shuttle of the sewing machine as it bit through khaki cloth. Around her, German women bent over piles of uniforms, American uniforms now, repairing seams, replacing buttons, reattaching patches for a war that wasn't theirs anymore. The needle jerked, snapped and broke. Elsa sighed. Lotta, 2 tables away, glanced up from her pile of torn sleeves. You'll wear that machine out, she said softly. Elsa smiled without lifting her head. At least something here gets to break. The room tittered. A few women chuckled, more out of surprise than amusement. Even humor felt strange after so many years of silence. The guard at the door, a man with freckles and a sunburned nose, pretended not to hear. He was reading something glossy, bright, out of place in the dull light. When the bell rang for the lunch break, the women laid down their work and stretched their cramped hands. The guard tossed his paper aside, the colored pages sliding across a chair and onto the floor. Marta noticed it first. What is that? Elsa followed her gaze. The paper glowed faintly under the bulb. She walked over, picked it up carefully, and felt something between her fingers she hadn't felt in years. Thick paper, smooth, new. The cover showed a family under a Christmas tree. A woman in a pressed dress, a smiling husband, 2 children glowing like painted dolls. The words across the top read, Sears, Roebuck & Co. Christmas 1944. Elsa traced the gold letters. A magazine? Lotta leaned in, eyes wide. No, it's a catalog. They gathered close around it as though it were contraband scripture. Marta flipped a page. Bright photographs of kitchens, living rooms, lamps shaped like flowers. Another page, washing machines lined up like soldiers in white enamel armor. Lotta pressed her fingers to her lips. Automatic washer, she read, sounding out the English. You just put clothes in. Marta's voice dropped low. And then you walk away. The 3 women stared at the image. The machine was the size of a small stove, its chrome edges shining like a miracle. Beneath it, a price printed in perfect black type, $87.50. Easy monthly payments. Elsa did the math in her head. That's more than 4 months of my father's pay before the war, she whispered. For a machine that washes clothes. Maybe it's not real, Lotta said, desperate to believe that. Maybe it's advertising. It's real, Marta said flatly. Look, here's another. A refrigerator that makes its own ice. A stove that lights itself. Her hands began to shake. Do you understand what this means? These people use machines to do the work we used our lives for. Elsa turned the page faster now, as if looking for the lie that would make it all make sense. Toys, radios, kitchen mixers, silver toasters that could brown 4 slices at once, a bicycle painted cherry red with a bow on its seat. She stopped on the image of a child's bedroom. Wallpaper covered in pink flowers, a little bed white as snow, a doll propped neatly on the pillow. Lotta touched the picture with trembling fingers. One child, she whispered. One room. Marta closed her eyes. When I was a girl, 4 of us shared one blanket. We took turns at the stove because there wasn't enough coal to stay warm together. Elsa flipped to the back. A page filled with women's shoes. Page after page, heel after heel. 40, 50 different kinds. She laughed, but the sound cracked in the middle. They have shoes for fashion, not just for weather. Lotta's breath hitched. They put toys in their food. Machines wash their clothes. They make cheese sweet. And they call it normal, Elsa said. The words hung between them, weightless and unbearable. The guard came back, whistling. Find something you like? She asked lightly, noticing their stares. Elsa looked up, startled, clutching the catalog. The guard grinned. Christmas shopping, huh? She said it like a joke, but the kindness in her tone made it worse. The 3 women didn't answer. When the guard turned her back, Elsa folded the page with the washing machine, one perfect, gleaming rectangle, and slipped it inside her uniform jacket close to her heart. Morning came with the sound of rain tapping the barrack roof, a soft, steady rhythm that made the camp smell of mud and pine. The sky was bruised gray, the kind of color that reminded Elsa of home, though nothing about this land was home. After roll call, Sergeant Medina stood near the gate with her clipboard tucked under one arm. We're short on kitchen hands today, she called. Need 3 volunteers for town delivery mess supplies. Before Elsa could think, her hand went up. Marta gave her a look, half warning, half disbelief, but followed. Lotta, of course, raised hers too. An hour later, they were in a military truck rumbling down the road into Shreveport. The wipers smeared the rain into ribbons. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and wet magnolia. The town appeared like a film set, streets lined with small shops, awnings striped in red and white. Window displays filled with things that shouldn't exist during war, silk dresses, coffee tins, chewing gum. The truck stopped outside a depot near the train station. Unload the crates, then wait, the driver said. You'll be picked up at noon. They carried boxes through the drizzle, their boots slick on the wooden ramp. The Americans hardly looked at them. Prisoners in gray were part of the scenery now. When the work was done, Medina motioned them toward a stand at the corner of the street. You girls thirsty? It wasn't really a question. She led them under a tin awning where a man in suspenders stood behind a cart, loaded with glass bottles on ice. He had a wide grin and a voice like music when he said, RC Cola, ladies, 10 cents a pop. Elsa stared at the bottles, their glass sweating, the amber liquid fizzing faintly beneath the caps. She hadn't seen soda since 1939. Medina dug into her pocket and paid the man without looking. 4, she said. And 1 moon pie if you've got it fresh. The man chuckled. Always fresh. He handed her a small paper-wrapped pastry. The smell of chocolate drifted through the air. Medina turned and passed the bottles around. Drink slow, she said. It's mostly sugar and bubbles, but it'll change your mood. Elsa hesitated, then pressed her thumb under the cap. The hiss that followed startled her. She took a sip and nearly gasped. It bit back, sharp and cold, sweet enough to sting. Tiny bubbles fizzed against her tongue. It was ridiculous, unnecessary, wonderful. Lotta giggled, wiping a line of foam from her lip. It tastes like lightning, she whispered. Marta took a sip, frowned, then took another. It's unnecessary, she said, but she didn't stop drinking. Medina broke the moon pie in half and handed each of them a piece. Chocolate marshmallow biscuit, she said. Built to survive the Depression, Elsa bit into it. The chocolate shell cracked, the soft center giving way to sugar and air. The sweetness hit like a wave, bigger than the cheesecake, wilder somehow, as if America itself had been baked into it. For a moment, none of them spoke. The rain pattered. Cars hissed past on the wet road. Across the street, a young black boy in overalls balanced on a curb, holding a bottle of the same cola, laughing with his friends. Lotta nudged Elsa's arm. Look at him. He's just happy. Medina followed their gaze. Yeah, she said softly. That's what this country does best when it remembers how. The boy noticed them staring. Instead of looking away, he waved. A small open wave, friendly, unguarded. Elsa froze, unsure what to do. Then, without understanding why, she raised her hand and waved back. The boy smiled wider, showing the gap where a tooth was missing. He turned and ran down the street, his laughter fading into the rain. Elsa felt her throat tighten. He waved, she said quietly, as if that simple act broke a law of nature. Medina tilted her head. You wave at people, they wave back. Works most of the time. Marta shook her head slowly. No, you don't understand, she said. Back home, a child like that wouldn't even... She stopped herself. Her voice cracked. We were told they were less. The sergeant's face softened. You were told a lot of things that weren't true. Rain gathered in puddles around their boots. Elsa's bottle was empty now, the glass cool and clean in her hand. The moon pie was gone, but the sweetness lingered, clinging to the back of her throat. A whistle sounded near the train yard. Steam billowed from an engine down the street, white against the gray sky. People were boarding, soldiers, mothers, men in suits. All ordinary, all alive. Sometimes, Medina said, you got to see a different kind of life to remember what one looks like. Elsa looked at her, the strength in her posture, the calm in her face, the kindness she carried without apology. You don't hate us, Elsa said suddenly. After everything. Why not? Medina thought for a moment, then shrugged. Hate's a job that pays bad, she said. I got better work. The answer landed like scripture. They stood there a while longer, letting the rain cool their skin, letting the bubbles fade from their tongues. Lotta hummed softly, a tune Elsa didn't recognize. Marta leaned against the wall, eyes closed, as though she were memorizing the sound of calm. When the truck returned to take them back, the town already smelled of dry earth and gasoline again. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that caught reflections of clouds moving fast. As they climbed into the truck bed, Elsa turned for one last look at the boys' street. The stand was still there, the cart empty now, a paper wrapper blowing along the gutter. She touched her pocket. 2 pieces of paper rested there, the recipe and the catalog, and beside them a third, the torn wrapper. The announcement came on a morning bright enough to feel false. The air smelled of chalk and soap. The camp square swept clean for ceremony. A line of POW women stood in formation, sunlight glinting off the brass buttons the Americans made them polish. Captain Whitaker, the officer who ran the compound, stepped onto a wooden platform, clipboard in hand. His southern accent softened his English into something almost melodic. Ladies, he began, as of this week several of you have been approved for repatriation. Ships are sailing home. Germany is changing. He paused, choosing the next word carefully. Rebuilding, the line shifted. A murmur rose like wind through dry grass. Elsa's stomach dropped. She hadn't imagined this moment would ever arrive. Not the going home, but the idea of having to decide. Captain Whitaker read from the list. Bauer, Elsa, Engel, Marta, Kruger, Lotta. The world seemed to tilt. Elsa blinked, trying to process the sound of her own name spoken by a man in an American uniform. Beside her, Lotta gasped and grabbed her sleeve. We can go home, she whispered, half laughing, half crying. Marta didn't move. Medina stood at the back of the formation, arms folded, expression unreadable. When the captain finished, she stepped forward and gestured for the chosen women to follow. Let's go, she said. Briefing in the rec hall. Inside, the air was thick with heat and questions. A long table had been set up with papers, pens, and a flag pinned to the wall. The Americans called it debriefing. Whitaker paced slowly. You'll be processed, examined, and placed on transport within a week. Ships leave from New York. You'll be given clothes, food, and 2 weeks' rations for the journey. Lotta was practically shaking. We'll see our homes again, she said under her breath. But Marta's eyes were fixed on the window, her face set in a mask of stone. Homes, she said quietly. Or ruins, Elsa couldn't speak. Her mind kept circling the same thought. Home. The word was supposed to feel like safety, but it sat in her chest like a stone. After the briefing, Medina found them outside, sitting on the steps. You don't look happy, she said. Usually people smile when they hear they're leaving. Lotta looked up, her expression bright and uncertain. We are happy. I think, Marta shook her head. Home is a place that doesn't exist anymore. Medina sat beside them, resting her elbows on her knees. You've got choices now. That's harder than it sounds. Elsa turned toward her. Do you think we'll be welcomed? Medina didn't answer right away. You'll be seen. That's not the same thing, Lotta frowned. You mean, they'll blame us? They'll want to forget, Medina said. You'll be a reminder of what they can't. The words hung in the warm air like humidity. Elsa looked down at her hands, still calloused from the radio equipment she used before the war. The same hands that had translated orders and coded messages, made herself useful to a cause she no longer understood. What if I don't want to go back? She asked suddenly. The sergeant turned her head slowly. Then you stay. Work detail, maybe. Teaching, translation, the army's full of paperwork and half of it's in German. Marta snorted softly. Stay in a prison? Medina shrugged. Depends on what you call prison. That night, Elsa couldn't sleep. The barracks were filled with whispers. Women packing what little they had, writing names on scraps of paper in case someone needed to find them later. Lotta hummed while she folded her uniform, a lullaby her mother had taught her. I'll see her again, she whispered. I'll see her house, my street. Her voice trailed off. If it's still there. Marta sat on her bunk, staring at nothing. You'll find ghosts, she said quietly. That's all home will have left to give. Elsa sat by the window, watching the floodlights sweep the yard. She reached into her jacket and unfolded the papers, the recipe, the catalog page, the candy wrapper. 3 fragile pieces of an impossible life. Each one spoke a different language of survival. One said learn to be patient. Another said you could have more. The last said you deserve sweetness. Together they made a kind of scripture she didn't want to lose. Outside, a night train moaned its long, low whistle. Somewhere, ships waited in harbors, their decks washed clean and ready. Lotta whispered, Are you afraid? Elsa didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the pencil stub that still sat on the windowsill, the one Medina had left with the cheesecake recipe. On the back of a scrap of brown paper, she wrote 4 words, too much on purpose. The phrase that had once sounded foreign now felt like a map. In the dim light, Marta leaned over her shoulder. What does that mean? Elsa smiled faintly. It means maybe I've learned something here worth keeping. Marta looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. The night before departure, the camp was quiet in a way that made sound itself feel like trespass. Even the guards' voices were softer, drifting like smoke through the fog that had settled low over the yard. Somewhere far off, a generator hummed, a faint, steady rhythm like a mechanical heart that refused to rest. Elsa lay awake, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Lotta slept beside her, clutching the edge of her pillow like a lifeline. Marta snored softly on the other bunk, one arm draped over her eyes. In the silence, Elsa could hear the faint ticking of the clock above the door, counting down the last hours before morning. The last hours she would spend in this place that wasn't home but had taught her what humanity sounded like. She sat up quietly and reached for her jacket. The 3 folded papers rustled inside the pocket, the recipe, the catalog page, and the torn moon pie wrapper. Together they felt heavier than any metal she had ever seen pinned on a uniform. She held them a moment, then stood and slipped out of the barracks. The air outside was damp and silver, the moonlight breaking through clouds in thin ribbons. She crossed the yard quickly, boots crunching on gravel, her breath visible in the chill. When she reached the mess hall, she hesitated at the door. A single light burned inside. Sergeant Medina was there, sleeves rolled up, cleaning a counter with the lazy rhythm of someone keeping her hands busy to quiet her thoughts. When she looked up, she didn't seem surprised. Couldn't sleep either, huh? Elsa shook her head. No, Medina nodded toward the stove. Figured. It's what happens before leaving. Your body knows more than your mind does. She paused, studying Elsa's face. You bring it? Elsa reached into her pocket and unfolded the paper. The recipe had yellowed slightly at the folds, the pencil marks faint but legible. Yes, the sergeant smiled, just a small curve of her mouth, tired but warm. Then let's do it. The kitchen smelled of flour and soap, of something that had once been comfort and might be again. Medina handed Elsa a bowl and a wooden spoon. You remember what I told you? Elsa nodded. Room temperature. Not cold. Good. Medina cracked the eggs, whisking with efficient grace. You bake angry, the cake knows it. You rush it, it collapses. It's like people. Elsa smiled faintly. Then I've known a lot of collapse cakes. They worked in silence for a while. The rhythmic scrape of the spoon and the hiss of the oven filled the room. Elsa measured sugar with careful precision, leveling the spoon the way she used to when she calibrated transmitters. Each ingredient went in like an act of faith: cream cheese, sugar, vanilla, eggs. Simple things, yet each one carried weight. When the mixture was ready, Medina handed her the crust tin. Graham crackers crushed fine, butter pressed smooth. Go ahead, she said. Elsa poured the filling, watching it spread slowly, perfectly. For a moment, the swirl of cream caught the light, gleaming like marble. She placed it into the oven, closed the door, and exhaled. Medina leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You thinking about home? Elsa shook her head. Not anymore. That's good, the sergeant said quietly. Home's not a place. It's people you can stand being quiet with. The sentence settled in the air between them. Elsa sat on a stool, watching the oven's glass fog slightly with heat. I used to think discipline was what made me strong, she said softly. Obedience, order. But maybe it was just fear dressed in uniform. Medina glanced at her, then looked back at the flickering stove light. Takes guts to admit that. Most folks die defending the lies that raised them. When the timer ticked, Elsa opened the oven door. The scent hit her like memory and prophecy all at once, sweet, warm, alive. The cake was pale gold, trembling slightly at the center. She set it on the counter, staring. It's beautiful, she whispered. Medina grinned. Not bad for a midnight crime. She tore a piece of parchment paper and slid it under the tin. We'll let it cool. Then you take it to the train tomorrow. Eat it on the way or give it to someone who looks like they need a little sweetness. Elsa blinked hard, her throat tightening. You mean, I can take it? It's your recipe now, Medina said. You earned it. Elsa swallowed, the ache in her chest equal parts sorrow and gratitude. How do you know I won't forget you? Medina wiped her hands on a rag and smiled. You won't. The trick about kindness is it spoils you. Once you've tasted it, you can't go back to hunger. They stood there a moment longer, the silence comfortable now. The oven ticked as it cooled, the air still humming faintly with heat and sugar. Elsa looked at the cake, then at the woman who had taught her how to make it. If they ask me what I learned in America, she said, I'll tell them this: that even cheese can be sweet if you treat it gently. Medina laughed softly, shaking her head. That's one way to put it. Outside, the fog had lifted. The moonlight poured through the window, silvering the tin edges of the cake. Elsa stood beside it, feeling its warmth, and realized this was what transformation looked like. Not a march, not a speech, not a victory. Just two women, one oven, and the quiet proof that gentleness could survive the worst of wars. 20 years later, the world smelled different. The air no longer carried smoke or ration dust, and the sound of trains no longer meant exile. In Munich, cafes had returned. Real ones, with sugar bowls on every table and windows dressed in lace. Elsa sat at one of them now, her gloved hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that steamed against the winter light. Across the street, a bakery displayed its treasures behind glass. Loaves, pastries, and there in the center, cheesecake. Pale, smooth, crowned with a shimmer of sugar. It looked the same as it had that first time in Louisiana. She smiled before she realized it. The waiter approached, a young man in a crisp apron. You'd like a slice, Fräulein? Elsa hesitated, the word Fräulein feeling strange after all these years. She nodded. Yes, just one. He returned with the plate a moment later, the slice perfectly triangular, a small fork resting beside it. The same pale gold, the same faint scent of vanilla and butter. She stared at it for a long moment before taking the first bite. The taste bloomed like memory, soft, dense, impossibly sweet. The cafe faded, the snow beyond the window disappeared, and she was back in that camp kitchen. The hiss of the oven, the warmth of sugar in the air. Sergeant Medina's voice saying, You bake angry. The cake knows it. Elsa set her fork down and took a breath. The city outside moved like music, bicycles ringing, trams gliding past, a newspaper boy shouting headlines about peace treaties and trade. Germany had rebuilt, but the ruins had never quite left her bones. They lived quietly beneath her ribs, whispering reminders that rebuilding was not the same as forgetting. She reached into her handbag and drew out an old leather wallet. Inside, wrapped in a small square of linen, were 3 fragile papers: a faded recipe, edges soft from folding, the pencil still faintly legible; a catalog clipping, the gleaming washing machine, the promise of easy monthly payments; and the torn moon pie wrapper, flattened smooth as silk. Her fingertips lingered over each one, tracing the creases like old scars. She'd never told anyone about the camp. Not really. People wanted stories about victory or suffering, not kindness. They didn't know where to place a tale about American soldiers feeding German prisoners dessert. There wasn't a category for that. Marta had returned to Bremen and married a teacher. Lotte had gone to Stuttgart, joined a Red Cross office. Letters had passed between them for a while, careful, tender, then fewer each year. All 3 had carried the war inside them in different ways. Elsa had stayed quiet, found work at a small post office, sorted letters that weren't hers, words meant for other lives. But at night she baked, always the same thing, cheesecake. At first by memory, later by muscle. She never used a recipe anymore. She didn't need to. But she always whispered the old lines to herself as she stirred the batter. Nicht kalt. Bake slow. She had baked through grief, through loneliness, through the years when Europe learned to say we are civilized again. Sometimes she brought slices to neighbors, sometimes to the widows at the pension house. Nobody ever knew why the sight of someone smiling over a piece of sweet cheese made her throat tighten. The waiter passed again, asking if she wanted more coffee. She nodded absently. On the radio by the counter, an American jazz song floated through static. The voice, a woman's, was smooth as cream. Blue skies smiling at me. Elsa closed her eyes. For a moment she could almost smell the Louisiana pines again. She thought of Sergeant Medina often, though she never knew what became of her. Sometimes she imagined the sergeant back home in San Antonio or maybe New Orleans, still baking, still teaching strangers to be gentle. Sometimes she wondered if Medina remembered her too, the German woman who had needed a war to learn the temperature of kindness. A small laugh escaped her lips. The waiter looked over, puzzled. She shook her head and smiled. Nothing, she said, just a sweet memory. The slice was half eaten now. She pushed the fork aside and leaned back, watching the city go about its business. Children running, a woman adjusting her hat, a man buying flowers in the snow. Life, everywhere, unafraid of sweetness. Elsa took out the recipe one last time. 20 years later, Elsa still baked every Sunday. Not for profit, not for memory, but because peace had a flavor she didn't want to forget. A soldier once taught her that kindness can rise even from ruin. That cheese can be sweet if you learn not to rush it. She used to believe strength meant silence, discipline, fear. But now, strength looked like gentleness, like sugar melting into cream. And if she had been wrong about that, she thought, then maybe she'd been wrong about everything, because in the end, some lessons don't need to be written in history books. They're baked, shared, and remembered, one slice at a time. If this story moved you, share it. Because sweetness, once learned, never truly leaves.